It was a quiet morning at the Turner Ranch, far out in the wide-open plains of Montana. The sky was still soft gray and the air smelled like hay and rain. A few horses stood near the wooden fence, their tails swinging slowly. Birds called from the cottonwood trees as the first light touched the hills. The whole place felt peaceful, calm, and full of life. Ethan Cole had been up since before sunrise. He was a quiet man, steady in his ways, not one to waste words. Every morning he walked to the stable, his boots crunching against the gravel, and started his chores. He checked the horses, refilled the water troughs, and fixed anything that needed mending. The others on the ranch respected him because he worked hard and never complained. That morning, while Ethan was cleaning the stalls, he heard light footsteps behind him. It was Lila Turner, the ranch owner's daughter. She was carrying a bucket of oats, her hands strong from years of work. Lila wasn't like other girls from town who cared about dresses or ribbons. She grew up on horseback, fixing fences and rounding up cattle beside her father. Her brown hair was tied in a loose braid, strands falling over her face. Ethan glanced up as she passed. "Morning," he said quietly. Lila nodded back, her voice soft. "Morning, Ethan." She knelt beside a young mare, patting its neck as she poured the oats into a wooden trough. The way she worked, gentle, focused, and sure, always caught Ethan's attention. He'd never said much to her before. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know what to say. Lila wasn't the kind of girl you impressed with jokes or fancy words. She had a strength about her that made most men stay careful around her. But that morning, something felt different. Maybe it was the sunlight catching her hair, or maybe it was the quiet comfort of the stable. When she stood up and brushed her braid from her shoulder, Ethan spoke before thinking. His voice came out honest and calm. "Your hair looks fine today," he said. Lila froze. Her hand stopped mid-motion, the oats bucket still half full. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. There was no teasing in his face, no smirk, no hidden meaning. Just a simple, plain truth. But something in her chest tightened. Her cheeks turned slightly red and she blinked as if unsure how to react. After a long second, she said nothing. She just turned and walked away toward the barn door. The sound of her boots faded, leaving only the soft snorts of the horses. Ethan stood there, his brow furrowed. He had no idea what had gone wrong. He hadn't meant to upset her. It was only a small compliment. The rest of the morning passed slowly. Lila didn't come back. Ethan kept working, though his thoughts wandered. Had he said something foolish? Maybe she thought he was joking. He didn't mean to make her uncomfortable. He just admired the way the morning light had touched her hair. It had looked warm and natural, like something out of a quiet painting. At lunchtime, the other ranch hands gathered near the cookhouse. They laughed, joked, and passed plates of beans and bread. Ethan sat at the far end eating in silence. Then one of the older hands, Jim, nudged him. "Heard you said something nice to Miss Lila this morning," he said with a grin. "Got brave, huh?" The others chuckled. Ethan looked down at his plate, embarrassed. "It wasn't like that," he said quietly. But the teasing continued, harmless on the surface but sharp enough to sting. In small towns like theirs, a single sentence could turn into a rumor before sunset. Ethan sighed and went back to work early, hoping the talk would die down. Meanwhile, Lila was in the hay barn, brushing one of the horses. She kept hearing his voice in her mind. "Your hair looks fine today." It sounded so simple, but it stirred something deep inside her. Years ago, when her mother was sick, she had cut her hair short to help her care for her. People in town had laughed at her, calling her the boyish ranch girl. Even after her hair grew long again, the memory stayed. Compliments about her looks made her feel uneasy, as if someone was judging her appearance instead of her work. Ethan didn't know any of that. He only knew that he had said something kind and had somehow made her pull away. The afternoon dragged on. He worked out near the pasture, mending a broken section of fence. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and dust. Now and then, he'd see Lila across the field leading a horse or helping the younger hands. She didn't look his way once. When the day ended, the sky turned orange and pink. The men headed back to the bunkhouse, laughing and calling out to each other. Ethan stayed behind, leaning on the fence and watching the last bit of light fade behind the hills. He wasn't angry or hurt, just thoughtful. Words were simple, but sometimes they carried more weight than a man expected. In the farmhouse that night, Lila sat by the window brushing her hair. She could still hear Ethan's quiet voice in her memory. There was no mockery in it, only sincerity. She began to wonder if she had misunderstood. Maybe she had been too quick to take offense. He was always kind, always respectful. Perhaps he'd just meant to make her day a little better. The next morning, she saw him again by the corral, already at work. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words stayed stuck in her throat. So she walked past him silently. Ethan looked up, met her eyes for a moment, and nodded politely. She nodded back, and just like that, an invisible wall grew between them. The days ahead would be quiet, filled with small glances and unspoken thoughts. Neither of them knew that a simple line about her hair would change the way they saw each other, and the way everyone on the ranch would see them, too. The wind blew softly across the plains that evening, carrying with it a strange kind of energy, like the world itself was waiting for something to happen between them. The next few days at the Turner Ranch felt different, almost like the air itself had changed. Ethan noticed it the most. The ranch was still the same, cows grazing in the meadow, horses snorting in the morning air, and the sound of boots on the wooden floorboards. But Lila was quieter than usual. She still did her work, strong and focused, but she didn't speak to him. Not even a simple good morning. Ethan tried to brush it off at first. He told himself maybe she was just busy, or maybe she'd forgotten about that small moment in the barn, but deep down he knew something had shifted. The way she walked past him, her eyes looking away, told him she was avoiding him. One evening, while Ethan was brushing down the horses, two of the ranch hands, Jim and Ben, came into the barn laughing. "Heard you made the boss's daughter blush last week," Ben teased, leaning against a stall. "Careful, Ethan, she might tell her daddy you're after her." Ethan frowned and shook his head. "It wasn't like that," he said quietly. "I was just being kind." Jim smirked. "Kind, huh? Well, you sure got everyone talking. Ain't every day a quiet man like you says something to Miss Lila." They left laughing, but Ethan didn't laugh. He didn't like being the center of gossip, especially when he'd done nothing wrong. He finished his work and walked out into the open field, where the sun was setting over the hills. The sky was red and gold, the wind gentle. He leaned on the fence, thinking. Across the pasture, Lila was walking her favorite mare, Daisy. Her braid swung behind her as she guided the horse with soft hands. For a moment, Ethan wanted to go talk to her, to explain that he hadn't meant anything wrong by his words, but something stopped him. Maybe pride, maybe fear, maybe respect. Inside the farmhouse that night, Lila sat by the kitchen table with her father, Thomas Turner. He was a strong man with gray hair and rough hands from years of work. "You've been quiet lately," he said, looking over his newspaper. "Everything all right at the ranch?" Lila nodded. "Yes, Pa, everything's fine." He studied her for a moment. "It's that new hand, Ethan Cole, isn't it? Good worker. Quiet fella. I like him." Lila looked down, pretending to sip her tea. "He's fine, Pa," she said quickly. But her mind wasn't fine. That morning in the barn kept replaying in her head. The way Ethan said it, soft but honest. "Your hair looks fine today." She had heard plenty of compliments before, but this one had felt different. It had caught her off guard. Lila had always been judged for her looks growing up. When she was younger, her hair was short because she cut it to help her sick mother, and some people in town had mocked her. They called her a boyish ranch girl. She had learned to harden her heart to comments about her appearance. That's why Ethan's words hit her so unexpectedly. He wasn't teasing her. He wasn't trying to flirt. He had spoken from a place of kindness, and that scared her, because kindness was something she wasn't used to receiving so openly. The next day, work went on as usual. The men were repairing fences in the north pasture, and Lila was helping to check the feed supplies. The weather was changing, dark clouds forming far out on the horizon. Ethan saw her coming toward the barn with a clipboard in her hand. He decided to give it one more try. "Morning, Miss Lila," he said softly, taking off his hat. She paused, her voice polite but distant. "Morning, Ethan." He wanted to say more, to explain himself, but she had already walked past. The wind carried her scent of hay and soap, leaving him standing there, words unspoken. That afternoon, the first drops of rain began to fall. Everyone hurried to cover the haystacks and bring the horses inside. Ethan and Lila ended up in the same barn again, working side by side without talking. The sound of rain hitting the tin roof filled the silence. When a flash of lightning lit up the sky, one of the younger horses panicked, kicking against its stall. Lila rushed forward to calm it, but the horse reared, nearly knocking her back. Ethan was beside her in seconds, steadying her with one arm while whispering to the animal in a low voice. Slowly, the horse calmed down. "Thank you," Lila said quietly, her voice softer now. "You're welcome," Ethan replied, his eyes meeting hers for a brief second. For the first time in days, neither looked away immediately. Something warm and unspoken passed between them. But before either could say more, Jim entered the barn, grinning. "You two hiding from the storm or making plans?" he joked. Lila's face turned red. She stepped back, picked up her hat, and walked away without another word. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't respond to Jim. He just went back to work in silence. Later that night, after the storm passed, the air smelled fresh and the moon shone through the clouds. Ethan sat on the porch of the bunkhouse cleaning his boots. Inside, he could still hear the other ranch hands laughing, retelling the day's events. But he stayed quiet, lost in thought. He remembered the way Lila had looked when he steadied her, the surprise in her eyes, the quick breath she took. He didn't know what she was thinking, but for the first time he wondered if maybe she didn't hate him after all. In her room, Lila brushed her hair, listening to the soft patter of rain outside. She felt guilty for the way she had treated Ethan. He had only spoken kindly and she had pushed him away. The ranch was full of rough men who didn't think twice before saying rude things, but Ethan wasn't like them. He was gentle, respectful, and honest. She remembered the way he had calmed the horse and how he had stepped in to help her without hesitation. She found herself smiling softly, though she didn't understand why. The next morning, the sky was clear again. Lila went out early, hoping to avoid the crowd. As she passed the stable, she saw Ethan fixing a broken wheel on the feed cart. For a moment, she stopped, thinking of saying something. Maybe, "Good morning," maybe "Thank you." But before she could, another ranch hand called her name and she turned away. Ethan looked up just in time to see her leaving. He sighed, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Something inside him told him that she wasn't angry anymore, just unsure. Maybe she needed time. By evening, the ranch had returned to its normal rhythm. Horses were fed, the cattle were secure, and the sunset painted the fields golden. Ethan stood by the corral fence, watching Lila as she worked with her mare, her braid shining in the soft light. She laughed at something one of the ranch boys said, and for the first time in a while, Ethan saw her smile again. It eased the heaviness in his heart. He didn't expect her to speak to him right away. He didn't even hope for it. He just wanted her to know that he meant no harm, that his simple compliment had come from respect, not pride. As the sun dipped below the hills, Lila turned slightly and caught him looking her way. Their eyes met across the corral, and for a small second she smiled. A quiet, grateful smile. Then she looked away, pretending to adjust the saddle. Ethan smiled faintly to himself. Maybe, just maybe, things were changing again. Neither of them knew it yet. But this small spark of understanding would soon grow into something that would change both their lives and the peace of the entire ranch in ways they never expected. The next few days passed quietly on the Turner Ranch. The summer sun had grown stronger, and the wind carried the smell of dry grass across the wide fields. Work went on as usual, feeding the cattle, repairing the fences, checking the water troughs, but something hung in the air between Ethan and Lila, something neither could quite explain. They hadn't spoken since that small moment in the barn during the storm. Lila had wanted to thank him properly for helping her, but every time she saw him, her words stuck in her throat. Ethan, on the other hand, didn't want to make her uncomfortable again. He decided to keep his distance, though his eyes always seemed to find her across the fields. One afternoon, a strange stillness settled over the ranch. The air felt heavy, like the sky was holding its breath. Old Sam, the cook, looked out the window and muttered, "There's a storm brewing again. A bad one this time." By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered over the hills. The wind picked up, sharp and cold. Horses began stamping nervously in the pens. The smell of rain and lightning filled the air. Ethan was helping to secure the hay bales when he noticed Lila running toward the pasture. She was trying to bring in the horses before the storm broke. But one young foal, wild and stubborn, refused to be caught. It darted through the open gate, galloping toward the far side of the field. Without thinking, Lila went after it. "Lila!" Ethan shouted, dropping what he was doing. But she didn't stop. The sky cracked open with thunder. Rain started to fall hard and fast, soaking the ground. Lila's boots slipped in the mud as she chased the frightened foal through the tall grass. The animal bolted toward the stream that cut across the back of the ranch. Ethan jumped onto his horse and rode after her, the rain hitting his face like cold stones. By the time he reached the creek, the water was rising fast from the storm. Lila was there, trying to calm the foal, her clothes drenched, her hair sticking to her face. She didn't notice how quickly the mud was turning to a trap beneath her boots. "Lila! Don't move!" Ethan yelled, jumping down from his horse. But before she could react, her foot sank deep into the mud. The more she tried to pull it free, the deeper it went. Panic flashed in her eyes as the rain poured harder. The foal was trembling nearby, its reins tangled in a bush. Ethan ran toward her, slipping and stumbling through the mud. "Give me your hand," he shouted over the roar of the rain. Lila hesitated, but then reached for him. Their hands locked tightly, and Ethan leaned back with all his strength, pulling her out of the mud. She fell forward against him, both of them breathing hard, the rain running down their faces. For a moment, neither spoke. All they could hear was the thunder and the wild beating of their hearts. Ethan guided her back toward the barn, keeping one arm around her to steady her. When they finally reached shelter, both were soaked from head to toe. The storm raged outside, the wind howling through the cracks of the old barn walls. Inside, it was dim and quiet except for the sound of their breathing. Ethan found an old blanket on a barrel and handed it to her. "Here," he said softly. "You'll catch cold." Lila took it, her hands shaking slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan nodded, wringing out his hat and setting it aside. For a long moment they stood there, unsure of what to say. Then Lila looked at him, her eyes soft but troubled. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. Ethan frowned slightly. "For what?" "For how I acted that day," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When you said my hair looked fine. I didn't mean to walk away. It just caught me off guard." Ethan met her gaze. "You don't have to be sorry," he said gently. "I didn't mean anything wrong by it. I just thought you looked nice that morning. That's all." Lila blinked, a mix of surprise and guilt crossing her face. "I know you didn't mean harm," she said. I've always been judged for how I look. People used to tease me when I was younger. I guess I still carry that with me." Ethan's expression softened. "I understand," he said quietly. "People can be cruel. But I wasn't trying to judge you. I just said what I saw." Lila smiled faintly for the first time in days. "You're not like the others," she said. Ethan chuckled softly. "That's what they keep telling me," he replied. The rain outside began to ease, turning into a soft drizzle. A beam of light broke through a gap in the clouds, shining into the barn. Dust floated in the air, glowing in the golden light. For a while, they just stood there, both quiet, watching the rain slow down. Lila felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. The weight she had been carrying seemed to lighten. Ethan's calm presence, his simple way of speaking, reminded her that not everyone was out to hurt or mock her. After a few minutes, Ethan stepped closer to the door. "Looks like it's letting up," he said. "You should head inside and dry off. I'll check the fences." Lila hesitated. "You've done enough." "You should rest," Ethan smiled slightly. "Storms don't wait for rest," he said. "But thank you." She watched him walk out into the fading rain, his shirt still damp, his hat pulled low. For a long time, she stood there, clutching the blanket, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time: trust. That night, the ranch was quiet again. The rain had washed the dust from the air, and the stars shone brighter than before. Ethan sat outside the bunkhouse, sharpening his knife, lost in thought. The memory of Lila's eyes, filled with gratitude and warmth, kept returning to him. He wasn't sure what was happening between them, but he knew it wasn't just a passing moment. It was something real, something steady and growing quietly, like roots beneath the soil. Inside the farmhouse, Lila couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about how Ethan had rushed into the storm without hesitation, how he had pulled her free, how his words were always simple yet full of meaning. She got up and walked to the window. Outside, the land looked peaceful under the moonlight. For the first time, she realized how wrong she had been to judge him too quickly. Ethan wasn't just another ranch hand. He was a man of few words but deep heart, a man who saw people for who they were, not what they looked like. She whispered softly to the night air, "Thank you, Ethan." The next morning, the ranch woke up to clear skies and fresh air. Everyone was busy checking the fences and counting the animals after the storm. When Lila saw Ethan working near the barn, she walked up quietly, her boots crunching on the wet dirt. He looked up from his work, tipping his hat politely. "Morning, Miss Lila," she smiled. "Morning, Ethan." For the first time, there was no tension between them, just a calm, simple understanding. And though no one else noticed, something important had changed. A friendship had begun to bloom, quiet, gentle, and real, born not from words, but from a moment of honesty in the middle of a storm. Neither of them knew it yet, but that moment in the rain had tied their lives together in a way that would shape everything that came next. The next morning after the storm, the ranch seemed to sparkle under the sunlight. Every blade of grass glistened with drops of rain, and the air smelled fresh and clean. Birds returned to sing on the fence posts, and the world felt calm again. Ethan was up early as usual, checking the horses. He moved with quiet focus, but his thoughts were not so quiet. Every few moments he caught himself thinking about Lila, her voice in the barn, her eyes when she said sorry, and that soft smile before he stepped out into the rain. For the first time since he came to the Turner Ranch, Ethan felt something shift inside him. He wasn't a man who spoke much about feelings, but there was something gentle and peaceful about what had happened. It wasn't just attraction, it was respect, a kind of calm understanding. When Lila came out that morning, she was wearing her work clothes again, her braid pulled back neatly. She looked rested but thoughtful. As she passed the barn, she saw Ethan fixing a broken latch on the stable door. Their eyes met for a moment. He nodded politely. "Morning," he said. She hesitated, then smiled slightly. "Morning, Ethan. You got up early again?" He chuckled softly. "Old habits. The horses don't feed themselves." Lila laughed quietly, and for the first time in weeks it didn't feel awkward between them. It was simple, natural. She wanted to say more, but one of the ranch hands called her name and she had to walk away. Still, the warmth of that small moment stayed with her through the day. In the days that followed, a quiet friendship began to grow between them. They didn't talk much, but their actions spoke louder than words. Ethan would mend things around the ranch before anyone asked. He'd make sure her favorite horse, Daisy, always had enough water. Lila, in return, began bringing him coffee during the early morning shift. Sometimes she'd leave it on a fence post without a word, and he'd find it warm and waiting when he came by. People on the ranch started noticing the change. Old Sam grinned one evening as he watched Lila laughing at something Ethan said. "Looks like the sun finally came out for those two," he muttered. Jim, of course, tried to tease Ethan, but this time Ethan just smiled and kept working. One afternoon, after the chores were done, Lila found herself sitting by the wooden fence near the western field. The sun was setting low, painting the sky orange and pink. The cattle were calm, the wind gentle. Ethan walked up quietly, carrying a bucket of feed. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not at all." He placed the bucket down and sat beside her. For a while, neither spoke. The sound of the wind through the grass was peaceful. Lila finally broke the silence. "When you said my hair looked fine that day, I thought you were teasing me," she said softly. "I didn't take it kindly. I guess I was wrong." Ethan looked down at his hands, then up at the sky. "It's easy to misunderstand words," he said. "Sometimes kindness sounds strange when you're not used to hearing it." She turned her head toward him. "You're right," she whispered. "I'm not used to it. Not from men, at least. They usually see me as the boss's daughter or just someone who can fix fences. Not as—" She paused, searching for the right word. Ethan didn't interrupt. He just listened. "Not as a person with feelings," she finished quietly. He nodded slowly. "I understand that," he said. "Sometimes being quiet makes people think you don't feel much either." "But you do?" Lila looked at him with gentle eyes. "You do, don't you?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe more than I let on." They both laughed softly. The setting sun bathed their faces in golden light. It felt like a moment that didn't need more words. That evening, when Ethan walked back to the bunkhouse, he felt lighter. Lila's laughter stayed in his ears. She, too, couldn't stop thinking about their talk. For the first time, she felt truly seen. Not as the ranch owner's daughter or a hard-working ranch hand, but as herself. The next morning, they worked side by side repairing the wooden corral. Their rhythm matched perfectly. When he lifted, she steadied. When she measured, he nailed. Every now and then, their hands brushed, and both felt a strange mix of shyness and comfort. During lunch, Lila brought 2 sandwiches and handed one to him. "Thought you might be hungry," she said. Ethan smiled. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said. "But I wanted to." They ate together under the shade of an old oak tree. The breeze was warm, and for a while, everything felt easy. As the week went on, their friendship deepened. They began to share small pieces of their past. Ethan told her about his childhood on a small farm in Wyoming, how he lost his parents young and learned to work for his keep. Lila shared how she had always dreamed of traveling, but stayed to help her father after her mother passed. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. They just worked together in comfortable silence. Two souls who didn't need words to understand each other. One evening, as the sky turned silver with moonlight, Lila walked out to the barn where Ethan was finishing up. "You still working?" she asked softly. He looked up with a gentle smile. "Just making sure the latch is tight. Don't want Daisy running loose at night." She leaned against the wooden post, watching him. "You work harder than anyone I know," she said. He shrugged. "Work keeps me steady." "Maybe," she said, tilting her head slightly. "But I think there's more to you than just work." Ethan stopped and looked at her. For a moment, neither spoke. The air felt still, filled with something they both understood but didn't say aloud. Then she smiled gently. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Lila," he replied, his voice low and calm. When she left, Ethan stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet night. He realized that her laughter had become part of the ranch's sound to him, like the wind, the horses, and the rustling leaves. Over the next few days, the ranch crew started teasing less and smiling more. The quiet understanding between Ethan and Lila had softened the atmosphere. Even Mr. Turner noticed. One evening at dinner, he looked at his daughter and said, "You've been smiling more lately, Lila. Something good happening?" She looked down at her plate, hiding her smile. "Just good weather, Pa." But in her heart, she knew it was something else. Something simple, honest, and good. Later that night, she stood by her window again, watching the stars. She thought about Ethan's quiet strength, the way he respected everyone, and how he never looked at her with judgment. He had come into her life without noise or promise, yet he had somehow become part of her days. Out in the bunkhouse, Ethan looked up at the same stars. The sky stretched wide and endless above him. He thought of Lila's kindness, her courage, and her smile in the fading light. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere, not just to a job or a place, but to a story that was slowly unfolding, one day at a time. Neither of them knew what would come next. But both felt that something was growing between them, something stronger than friendship, gentler than romance, and deeper than either of them had ever expected. And though no words were spoken, both understood that the journey that began with a simple line, "Your hair looks fine today," was only just beginning to show its true meaning. The annual town fair arrived a few weeks later, and everyone at the Turner Ranch was buzzing with excitement. It was the one day of the year when the whole community came together to celebrate, farmers, ranchers, and families from miles around. There would be games, food stalls, a livestock show, and dancing under the big string lights after sunset. For most folks, it was a break from the long days of hard work. Ethan wasn't sure if he'd go at first. He wasn't much of a crowd person. The ranch was his comfort zone, quiet, steady, and familiar. But when Mr. Turner mentioned that Lila would be showing Daisy, her favorite mare, at the fair, Ethan found himself saying, "I'll come along. Might be good to help with loading." He told himself it was just for work, but deep down he knew it was more than that. On the morning of the fair, the ranch was full of cheerful noise. Lila wore a light blue dress for the event, simple yet beautiful. Her hair, usually tied back for work, was loose this time, curling softly at the ends. She looked different, but still very much like herself. Strong, kind, and natural. When Ethan saw her walking out of the house, leading Daisy toward the trailer, he froze for a second. The sunlight caught her hair again, just like that morning when everything had started. He tipped his hat slightly. "You look nice today, Miss Lila." She smiled gently. "Thank you, Ethan, and stop calling me Miss, it's just Lila." He grinned. "All right then. Lila." The fairground was alive with color and sound. Children running around with balloons, fiddlers playing lively tunes, the smell of roasted corn and fresh pies filling the air. The livestock section was busy, with people admiring horses, cows, and goats from different ranches. Lila stood proudly beside Daisy while the judges examined her mare. Ethan stayed nearby, watching quietly, making sure everything went smoothly. When the results were announced, Daisy won second place in her category. Lila's face lit up with pride, and she turned to Ethan, smiling from ear to ear. "We did it," she said. Ethan nodded. "She deserves it. You trained her well," She laughed. You helped too. Don't pretend you didn't. For the rest of the afternoon, they walked around the fair together, sharing moments that felt easy and real. They tried homemade lemonade from a local stand, watched the children's sack race, and even laughed as old Sam tried to win a prize at the shooting booth and missed every target. By the time evening came, lanterns were hung around the fairground and music filled the air. People gathered near the wooden dance floor as the band began to play. Lila and Ethan stood at the edge watching the crowd sway and twirl. Do you dance? She asked teasingly. Ethan shook his head. Not since I stepped on someone's foot in the 3rd grade. Haven't been invited since. She laughed softly. Well, consider this your invitation. Before he could protest, she took his hand. Her grip was warm and firm. They stepped onto the dance floor together. Ethan moved carefully, afraid to make a fool of himself, but Lila guided him with a quiet smile. The music was slow, gentle. For a moment, the world faded, the chatter, the laughter, even the sound of the band. It was just them, under the glow of string lights, moving in time with each other. You're doing fine, she whispered. He looked down at her, his voice low. I told you before. Your hair looks fine too. Lila paused, then laughed softly, her cheeks turning pink. You remembered. Hard to forget, he said with a small smile. People around them smiled too, seeing the simple warmth between them. It wasn't loud or showy, just honest and sweet. The fair had seen many young couples dance over the years, but there was something special about this quiet pair. 2 hard-working souls finding peace in each other's presence. After the dance, they walked away from the crowd toward the fence line where the field stretched into darkness. Fireflies blinked softly across the grass and the night was calm. Lila leaned against the wooden rail looking at the stars. Funny how things turn out, she said softly. If you hadn't said that thing about my hair, we probably wouldn't even be standing here tonight. Ethan chuckled. Guess a few words can change a lot? She turned to face him. I was wrong about you, Ethan. At first I thought you were just another ranch hand who'd come and go. But you've become something more. He looked at her quietly. Something more? She smiled shyly. A friend I trust. Ethan nodded, his heart warming at her words. That's all I ever wanted to be, he said gently. There was a long pause. The music from the fair drifted faintly in the distance. Lila brushed a strand of hair from her face and looked at him again. Ethan, she said, can I tell you something? Of course. When you said my hair looked fine that morning, it scared me. Not because of what you said, but because of how honest it felt. No one had spoken to me that simply in years. People always say things to impress or flatter, but you just said it because you meant it. Ethan smiled softly. I guess I did. And I didn't know how to handle that, she said. But I'm glad I learned. For a while, they stood in silence. The stars shone above them, bright and endless. The sound of laughter and music faded into the night air. Then Lila turned slightly and looked at him with a mischievous smile. Ethan, she said, your hair looks fine today. He blinked, surprised, then burst out laughing. Now that's just unfair. She laughed too, the sound bright and light as the night wind. Well, you started it, she teased. Ethan shook his head, still smiling. I guess I did, and I'm glad I did. The next morning, everyone on the ranch was talking about how the fair had gone. Old Sam teased Ethan, saying, Heard you danced under the lights, boy. Didn't think you had it in you. Ethan just smiled. Guess I had a good teacher. Lila passed by at that moment carrying a basket of feed. She caught his eye and smiled knowingly. The ranch hands noticed but said nothing this time. The teasing had stopped. It was replaced with quiet respect. Everyone could see there was something real between them, even if it was unspoken. Weeks passed, and life returned to its normal rhythm. But something had changed forever. Lila and Ethan continued to work side by side, their friendship now deeper than ever. Sometimes she'd hand him coffee in the morning without saying a word, and sometimes he'd fix something small around the ranch that she hadn't even noticed was broken. They never rushed anything. There was no grand confession, no dramatic ending. Just 2 people growing closer every day, bound by honesty, kindness, and simple respect. And long after the fair was over, people in town still told the story of what had happened that night. The story of how a quiet ranch hand once told the boss's daughter, "Your hair looks fine today," and how that simple line changed both their lives. It became a story about how kindness doesn't need fancy words or big gestures. just truth spoken gently at the right time. Years later, when people passed the Turner Ranch, they'd see Ethan and Lila working together, laughing side by side. They had built a life out of simple beginnings and quiet moments. And sometimes, when the sun hit her hair just right, Ethan would glance at her and say with a smile, "Your hair still looks fine, Lila." And every time, she'd laugh softly and reply, "And you still don't know how to take a compliment." It was never about the hair, really. It was about how a few honest words can plant the seeds of understanding, and how love, the real kind, often starts not with fireworks or fancy speeches, but with a simple, sincere moment shared between two hearts who see each other clearly for the first time.